River Valley School Board of Education. This meeting has been properly posted in the central office and the news has been notified. Deb, can you take roll call, please?
John?
Here.
Sarah C. Here. Kylie? Here. Fred?
Here.
Kathy?
Here.
Jeff?
Here.
Elizabeth?
Here.
I'm here, and the other Sarah?
Here.
9 present.
We have a quorum. May I have a motion for the proofs of notice be accepted as proper notice and to proceed with the meeting?
So, right up. Oh, I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have a motion for the approval of the agenda?
So moved. Sarah. Second, Sarah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 1, public comments. I'm just going to make a request before we start this meeting. I'm requesting that this board meeting be held in a civil and respectful manner. Being passionate about the well-being of our children is commendable, and the public is welcome to voice your concerns, your displeasure with the board, or your agreement with the board, but in a respectful manner. Intimidating the board members won't be tolerated. If there's disruption in the audience, I'm not going to hesitate to set up a monitor in the gym and you can watch the meeting from the gym. I'm not anticipating that, but I'm just setting my expectations. We generally have had respectful meetings, but I just wanted to put that out there. With that being said, we'll start with the public comments, and we have several people on the list. And I'll give you 3 minutes to talk. I'll let you know when you have 15 seconds left, so you know when to wrap it up. The first one is Matt Snow. Matt, please come up to the microphone, and can you introduce yourself? And
You bet. Before I do, is it possible for others to continue to sign up, or will you, or at the end? Is that possible?
yes.
Okay, great. My name is Matt Snow. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of my wife, Jennifer, who's not able to be here. We're both employed here at the district. She teaches middle school choir. I teach high school band. So again, imagine I'm going to speak with Jennifer's voice. Without masks in my choral classroom, my students are at a higher risk of contracting COVID-19 than in other classrooms. There is mounting scientific evidence that singing without a mask spreads COVID-19 at a higher rate than talking. Like everyone else, I'd like to get back to normal and sing my heart out without a mask in my way. However, at this current moment, I feel it is irresponsible to do that. I wear masks during choir rehearsals to protect my students, but only a couple of my students do the same, making our efforts quite ineffective. My hope is that we could prevent illness rather than reacting when multiple people get sick. Using science and best practices, Jerry Hui of the University of Wisconsin-South, the director of choral activities and the associate professor of music, has compiled research about singing during COVID-19 pandemic. He built a publicly accessible folder of scientific studies about COVID-19 to help choir directors make informed decisions about continuing classes. In the document, Hui, who graduated from UW-Madison with undergraduate degrees in computer science and music composition, he used his research background to create abstracts of studies and executive summaries on such topics as masks, aerosols, filtration, and room safety. I have provided you with copies of this document and have highlighted some key points to which I'd like to bring your attention. It is my hope that masks could be required in our choral classrooms so that we can keep our students safe. And again, my wife Jennifer would like to just point out a few things. Concerns about singing, executive summary. Singing is a high-risk activity that can lead to mass infection events. Singers can exhale a lot more than non-singers. Singing in general emits more droplets than speaking due to volume and the extensive use of vowels. Long-term damage from COVID-19 is still being studied. A couple other things to point out. Under personal protective measures, executive summary, social distance of 6 feet is still recommended by all researchers, plus face masks. If you meet, surgical masks and rigorous testing for all are absolutely required. Even for those without symptoms, mask wearing protects the community in general, but requires a high percentage of compliance for it to be effective. And lastly, we plan to return and safety protocols executive summary. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. Do not lift restrictions on singing, even when restrictions are lifted on other activities. Creating and adopting proposed safety protocols will be productive, but none of the documents state that singing is safe. All steps should be supported by research and should be open for modification as new studies become available. Thank you.
Carissa Brandenburg.
Good evening,
Could you just introduce yourself again and then just say
Carissa
you're
Brandenburg.
part of the
I'm
district?
at Arena. We have 3 kids here in the district, and then I also work for a school in the district.
Thank you.
I was not at the Tuesday policy meeting, so I kind of heard it secondhand that tonight we would be discussing some changes to the policy that was discussed last month and voted on. And that included changing some of the thresholds and lowering it. I don't think anybody on either side was like 100% happy with the plan that we ended up with, but I felt that it was a really good compromise on both sides. The 5%, it was there. Some of us were happy about it, some of us were not happy about it. But again, it was about compromise and trying to come together so that we could get the school year going. It was a concession for me personally and for many. And so I'm a little surprised and disappointed to hear that we're wanting to lower that and chip away at the policy that we all agreed to. I feel like there are some board members that are only listening to a small percentage of families in their area and not representing everybody in their area. That there's no way 100% of the people in your area are saying we are for this or against this. And as board members, I would hope that you would listen to all of us and try to come together with something that works for all of us. This constant trying to lower the threshold now into something that we all agreed on it's just chipping away at it until you eventually get to that point where we're back to mandatory. And it's very disappointing. I don't feel listened to, I don't feel heard, I don't feel represented right now. So I am asking you to please consider not lowering the threshold and not making any changes to this policy that the administration worked super hard on. They lived last year. They lived it, they were with students, they were with families. It was a very hard year and they came up with this policy and I think it is solid. So I ask tonight that you guys support that and don't vote for any changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Is it Dana or Dana?
Dana?
Dana. And can you introduce yourself, your last name, and if you're part of the district, just tell us a little bit.
I'm Dana Sandflavin. I live outside of Arena and I have 2 kids in the district. We have heard the idea that if students are not wearing a mask, there is a fear they will cause someone to die. Freedom of mask choice and death are not equal. Fear is used as a tool of manipulation. The majority of parents are not afraid. We are not afraid of a disease with a 99.9% survival rate. Taking away our consent, our body autonomy, and our right to choose what's best for our children is wrong. Your fear is not our responsibility. Your fear does not belong on the faces of the children. Vote no on the policy change and fear not. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Humphreys.
Good evening. I'm Jennifer Humphreys. I have 2 children in the district. My daughter Rhiannon is a senior, and many of you may know her. She has Kabuki syndrome, and along with that, she has a laundry list of medical issues. Among that is she's severely immune compromised. While she is fully vaccinated, she does go to UW-Madison once a month for an all-day infusion to give her an immune system. Her specialists, who range all over the country, have said that they don't believe the vaccine is effective in her case. So it is almost as if she is not vaccinated, even though she's had a vaccine. As a child with disability, she has a right to a safe education. Without wearing masks in her classes, she is not safe. And were she to contract COVID-19, she would most likely die. We do have plans in place if she were to contract COVID-19, where she would need to go on severe experimental drugs in order to possibly save her life. So I am asking this board to think about these children in our community. It's not just about the majority. It's about the kids who have immune compromised siblings, parents, grandparents, cousins. My sister-in-law has 2 elementary school kids at home with COVID because someone sent their child to school with COVID and there was no mask mandate. I cannot take my children to see their cousins, and I don't know how long it'll be. I also have a son who's in 6th grade. Last year, because of his sister, we kept him home to try remote learning. It was a disaster. As you all know, the importance of having our children in person, in the classroom, is vital to their education. He was failing all of his classes until he was able to go back in person, and then his grades were passing and above passing. I feel like not having a mask mandate is making me choose between my daughter's health and possible life and between my son's educational success. And that is not a fair choice for any family to have to go through. I'm sorry that there are people who feel that masks are uncomfortable. I'm sorry that people feel like it's a violation of their civil liberties.
Jennifer, you have about 15 seconds, so.
I could go on to say that I feel that wearing shoes or clothes is a violation because I find them uncomfortable. But no one is debating whether or not wearing clothes and shoes to school is a good idea. Mask mandates should not be relied on by parents. Parents are not qualified to make decisions. You need to listen to the experts. And I'm frankly very disappointed that this board is even looking to parents.
Thank you,
for
Jennifer. I
direction.
appreciate your time and your comments. Nathan Mauer? Nathan? I don't think I got your last name right, so go
Nobody
ahead.
ever does. It's Nathan Roy-Gomauer. Good evening, members of the River Valley School Board. My name is Nathan Roy-Gomauer. I live in Arena, and I have a daughter in the RV High School. As I understand it, on the agenda tonight is a policy recommendation from the River Valley School Board Policy Committee that would reduce the number of incidences of confirmed or suspected COVID required to trigger mandatory masking of students in classrooms. While it isn't a simple mask mandate, something that would be far more effective and easier to implement and track, coupled with a simple quarantine policy that would be easier for everyone to understand, it's better than the policy that was previously adopted. I urge you to make the new recommendation, the new policy for RV schools. As a quick thought experiment, I ask you to consider a different scenario, one that might be familiar to you if you ever lived in the American West. Let's say you entered a forest to go camping, and you knew the trees and vegetation were bone dry because of a prolonged drought, and you could smell the faint smoke from forest fires off in the distance, and you could see flames licking up the sides of hills and valleys many miles away. Would you still light your campfire because it's what you've always done? Because that's what makes coming to the woods to camp enjoyable? Would you light that campfire even though you've been warned by the fire department, professional foresters, and forest ecologists that doing so runs an enormous risk of starting yet another forest fire? Would you light that campfire even if you were told that the firefighters were so overwhelmed by all the other fires going on that they might not be able to handle another one? That it might rage out of control and burn down the houses and ranches of the folks who live nearby? Would you come back day after day and light new campfires and ignore all of that information and just hope you could stamp out any embers that might blow into the brush that surrounds you? Not following the expert recommendations of the American Pediatrics Association, the CDC, hundreds of virologists, physicians, and scientists around the world, and your own district physician consultant is tantamount to to lighting campfires in a bone-dry forest day after day and simply hoping you don't burn down the forest. It's almost like flicking lit matches into the brush on purpose. To quote Smokey the Bear, only you can prevent forest fires. Only you.
Thank you. Dave Chapman?
Hello, Board. My name is Dave Chapman. I've been living in Spring Green for about 10 years. I have a kid in the middle school and one in the elementary school. And I have coached the younger kids in soccer for the full time we've lived here. I appreciate that all of you have other jobs and families and that you're on the school board, not in search of fame or riches, but to help keep our school system running and maybe even make it better. I find it frustrating now, though, that a large group of parents in our community have overwhelmed you with emails and voicemails and threats about school funding, so much so that many of you have lost the capacity to listen. Some of you have lost interest in listening at all, leaving me and many other parents that actually participate in this educational system, including so many teachers, feeling like our voices are not being heard. Many of us naively assumed that since our schools and community did so well last year making COVID-related policies that helped keep their transmission and sickness and death rates lower than so many other communities, that the school board would obviously continue to follow the CDC and other medical guidelines. Instead, you have all been so overwhelmed by parents within the community that you have decided you know better than the CDC and the medical community at large, and now are making up your own guidelines. Why? Why? Why are you letting yourself be bullied about public safety issues? Why on earth have you decided to take this on your shoulders to try and figure out some new convoluted plan when the CDC and your own local medical community right here in River Valley are all advising you to just do what we did so well last year? You are making it hard on yourself, hard on the administration, hard on the teachers, and hard on the students. If you were just to follow the CDC or state local guidelines that say masks are suggested and follow common sense, that means people should be wearing masks. All of this gets so much easier. Testing right in the schools is amazing. It's an amazing accomplishment. Bringing down the thresholds before masking, as was decided the other night, moving in the right direction. But I feel like it's a waste of time. Time we don't have, since already cases are showing up in our own schools and the parents are getting the close contact calls. Without cohorts in the
You have about
elementary
15 seconds left.
Without cohorts in the elementary school, your one positive case per classroom threshold won't work. Without cohort separation in class, lunch, and playground, you can't control that spread, especially without masks. Again, I thank you all for taking the job of being at the school board. I would not want to be in your shoes right now. I do urge you all to go back to making decisions that a school board should be making and leave the medical decisions to the medical boards that are providing you well-researched guidance.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Normally I don't take a break during public comments, but I feel I need to say that because we may not agree with a person's point of view does not mean we're not listening. I guarantee you every single person on this board is listening. And I needed to say that. The next person is Lynn Erickson.
Good evening. I am Lynn Erickson, mother of 5, but 3 are still in the district. I'm in the township of Franklin. So I want to once again display to everyone what a mask can look like after one time wearing it. Some were not here at the last time when I brought this mask.
You can just address the board
Okay.
as long as you're up there.
You
Thank
can
you.
see the white from it, and I don't know if this was a used and reused but my son was not to wear this at all because of his special needs. So my heart goes out to you with yours. So I don't believe that this is simply a matter of uncomfortable or just, oh, it was a violation of my rights. It just isn't healthy. And I think that we need to really, really think about that. And I know that some of us are very for it and some of us are very against it. And that is causing much division in our school, our friendships, our community, and it's heartbreaking for me. I also believe that we should not be having a testing bias with this new protocol that we're doing. To say that because you are vaccinated, we don't need to test you. I don't think that there should be a get out of jail free card like that. Because there's nothing that says that the vaccine gives you immunity. It reduces your symptoms, but it does not give you immunity where you cannot catch it. That is why the booster shot comes in. I think if we're going to do testing on the kids, it should be fair to both groups. By the vaccinated, or to the vaccinated, and also to the unvaccinated. And to simply assume that while you're keeping your kid home, we're going to count you as COVID positive. Well, that's not fair. I don't think that's right. I want to add that to what I brought up about division, what something happened to me and it broke my heart. Friend just before school started called up and hey, you want to get together? And I did with they were underclassmen, friends of mine from long ago.
And you have about 15 seconds.
Okay. Conversation was really nice until that friend said to me, those that are not vaccinated don't deserve health care. That was shocking to me that a friend would say that. That is another parent that's right here in this River Valley area. If hate doesn't have a home here, then that should never be thought of or said. And
Thank you, and I appreciate your comments and
Thank you.
addressing it. Grace Stanton.
Good evening. My name is Grace Stanton. I have a daughter in the elementary school. Given the contagious nature of the current Delta variant, we feel it is best to not take chances, as masking works. Let us look to the experts, the CDC, our own medical advisor, Dr. Furukawa, our own nursing staff. Thank you all for participating. Their suggestions are to wear masks, socially distance, and frequently wash your hands. These simple protocols will both keep our kids and communities safer and relieve the burden of all of you, the staff, trying to track who wears a mask, how do we contact trace, all of these things, when all we need to do is just put on a simple yet effective mask. Thank you.
Thank you. Amelia?
Hi there, my name is Amelia Roy-Gormauer. So what seems to be driving this policy is personal stories. So I'm going to share mine. It's about those people out in the community that you don't know, but because a virus doesn't acknowledge boundaries of schools or families or communities or counties, our choices impact those people. Last year, on several occasions, my father was in the hospital fighting for his life. I couldn't be there to hold his hand because visitors weren't allowed. He couldn't talk loud enough to talk on the phone with me, but he needed us to be there for him. He had just retired 2 years prior. He was 85, in great shape up until recently, to that point. He at times kept forgetting why I couldn't be there with him. He was so uneasy and he was struggling to breathe. The exhausted nurses had to then serve as his emotional support on top of everything else they did up against the pandemic. And then they had to go home and, well, if they could even go home, right? Because some of them can't go home. But then they have to go home to their kids and live their lives. And they would take their own. Our decisions impact all of that, all of this. My dad was not allowed to even discuss needed surgery on his heart because there was no point, there was no space for him. He is that person in our community and in the other county and in the other town that our decisions impact. We have to care. If there are kids that can't wear masks because it's unhealthy for them, let's figure out solutions for them. Let's put our energy together to figure out solutions for them because they're there. If a child's mask is making them uneasy or making them sick, let's figure out a solution. Like maybe a face shield or something. But let's not forget that our decisions impact that person we don't know, who's having a harder time than we are. And I rarely ever tell this story because there are so many more people suffering. We lost 3 people in the last year. We had 2 diagnosed with life-threatening illnesses, just out of the blue, genetic illnesses, in my own immediate family. Someone's always suffering worse. This compounds that. Fighting for our rights without taking responsibility is not freedom, it's adolescence.
You have about 15 seconds.
So I'm asking, do not entertain that. Look up 5 conservative talk show hosts who are anti-maskers, all reported dead yesterday. All of them are dead. Please stop entertaining these anti-scientific. Please listen to Dr. Furukawa. He's right there. Thank you.
Thank you. John Litviak.
My name is John Litviak, and I have a son that attends at the district. At this point, I think things are clearly being overplayed. The masks have been proven by myself and others to be more of a hassle for people and actually cause more negative side effects from things such as breathing in your own carbon dioxide, which is supposed to be exhaled routinely for normal bodily functions. This was supposed to be a short-term thing. Now it just seems to be a manipulation technique, in my opinion. I think it's time certain things are recognized for what they really are. Instead of teachers and certain individuals standing up for the facts, doing research and questioning these things, they just comply with it regardless of the negative impact it has on people's rights, even after contradicting evidence is presented in their faces from numerous reliable sources. I went out of my way to look up how many people have succumbed to other illnesses, and it just seems at this point everything is blamed on COVID, which is highly suspicious. I don't think it's fair to manipulate students and blame it on the fact that CDC said so at this point. I'm willing to bet money that no shutdowns will occur, especially at River Valley, like they say. We all have had a chance to see how manipulation takes place the past 18 months, and people are sick of the behind-the-scenes agenda being forced upon them. First, it was social distancing to break down our unity. Then it was the masks to shut us up. Now it's the vaccines that should finish us off. Please wake up.
Thank you. On to item number 2, update on school district operations from administration.
Hello, board. Good to see you. I've got some administrators here tonight, and I'll just report to them and give them a chance to give you an update of how school's going so far and everything. And I guess I'll start down at the end with Mr. Radke, if I could, sir.
Sure. Obviously, we're just getting started in the school year. Students are back, and teachers are excited to see them in the classrooms. I don't have a lot to report on. We started a new Black Hawk period. It's our homeroom. It used to be our homeroom, and we're looking to do intervention with students during that time and support students who are struggling with certain skills. So, but yeah, it's been a good start, and kids are excited to be back in school.
Excellent. Peterson?
We are off to a good start. First few days are always a little bumpy when you're dealing with 4 and 5-year-olds, but we are learning how to carry our lunch trays and our breakfast trays without spilling them. So lots of good things. We learned how to get paper towel out of the dispensers. Lots of those things that have to be taught at 4 and 5. Elementary is really settling in. I have to say, thanks to the bus drivers, it's been tough to get settled into that routine, and we're starting to get there now. starting to get into the routine and a little more regular schedule and getting the kids back and here. I think one of our highlights is our before and after school program. The enrollment just keeps going up. Jennifer Moore-Kerr has taken over that for us as coordinator, and we have some high school students that are involved as assistants, and the program just continues to grow. We're over 30 kids on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and so it's really finally taken off, which is really nice to see. That's about it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Something that's interesting in each building is this year they've set aside time called Blackhawk Period. That's really trying to meet the needs of kids, allow them to have a chance to reach out to teachers. It's really put in there to identify if there's things that aren't being identified in class, a great way to group kids and give them some extra special attention. And that's happening at all buildings. And that's a really nice thing, really nice step that the administrators have all jumped into and put into their schedule. So pretty cool thing. That'd be our update. Any questions that you guys might have?
Okay, thank you. Item number 3, board member WASB member recognition program. WASB is a Wisconsin Association of School Boards, and the WASB awards points to board members who participate in WASB and National School Board Association professional development activities. And board members Sarah Young and I both reached level 2 of the WASB member recognition program.
Good job. Nice job. Congrats.
Item number 4, board reminders, announcements, and training opportunities. I don't have any tonight. Does anybody have any announcements? Okay. We'll move on to item number 1. Oh, I'm sorry. Item number 5, legislative update.
I guess I would just say that Brian Cry and I have been working on a couple things, obviously Brian with the budget and et cetera, but the ESSER 3 funding, which you hear a lot about in the news about the different funding that's coming from federal stuff. And that stands for the Elementary, Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. That's kind of phase 3, if you will. That has, from the state level, been then sent. DPI has their plan. That's sent off to federal, and now federal has to approve what Wisconsin hopes to use it for. So that's the state it's in right now. Districts that were in school, but also are recognized as having high poverty rates, will see more funding in that equation, I guess is what I would say. So that's some of the basic things out of ESSER 3, and it's kind of in this state of not quite done yet.
Any questions? Okay. We'll move on to action items. Thank you, Lauren.
You bet.
Item number 1, consent agenda. Checks, invoices, receipts, August 2021, open session meeting minutes, August 12, 2021, regular meeting. I'd entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda.
So moved, Kylie.
Second, Jeff.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 2, consideration and action on 2021-22 Madison Area Technical College dual credit contract. This is something we do annually, except it's not ready yet this month, so we're gonna push it back to either October or November.
What's the deadline? What is the deadline for this? Whenever they send it to us.
October or November.
Okay. Thanks, Brett.
Item number 3, consideration and action on resolutions accepting resignations, if any.
We do not have any.
Fantastic. Item number 4, consideration and action on hirings, if any.
We have none at this time.
Okay. Item number 5, consideration and action on policy committee recommendations. The first policy on there, which we've had on there for the past over a year, is 728, wearing masks and face coverings. We didn't have any changes to that policy. So right now, the policy states we recommend wearing masks. And masks are mandated on transportation. It's a federal mandate, so we don't have any control over that. So, but we didn't change our policy from last month. We have a couple discussion and review of board approved first readings for possible recommendation to the board for second reading. So the first one we have is 346.
Wait a second.
We are gonna move
Okay.
on to that in the next item.
Okay.
Because the next item talks about consideration and action on modifying instructional model.
Okay.
Got it.
So I think that's where we're gonna pick up our discussion.
Okay.
The first one, I'm gonna kind of go through these fairly quickly. If you have a question, stop me. Otherwise, I'm gonna assume that you've all read these and don't have questions. 346, testing programs of English language learner students. James Radke and Laura Siebold reviewed these policies and updated for the WASB Quick Check recommendations, and the English language learner ELL changed to limited English proficiency LEP. 342 is a new policy, limited English proficiency LEP program. Again, James Radke and Laura Siebold reviewed this new policy, and the new policy is based on information and recommendations from the WASB Quick Check. 361, selection of instructional materials. The committee, through the Quick Check, they said we should look at this one, and the committee recommended keeping River Valley's current policy with just a change to the first paragraph. Based on a recommendation from the WASB review, it stated that the legal references refer to state statutes, but it wasn't in our policy. Our policy didn't address what the state statutes are, so we just put that in the policy. Normally we don't do that, but it was noted in the Quick Check, so we did it this time. New 411.4, foster care children. We do have foster care children in our district, and so Lisa Choas reviewed this policy, and she thought it was a good idea that we do have this policy. So she reviewed this for us, and we're bringing it forward. 751, student transportation services. Brian Cry reviewed this policy and updated it with OTETA regulations, which are Omnibus Transportation Employee Testing Act. There was just some really specific language that WASB wanted us to have in our policy. Any questions? Brian would love to answer them.
I'll direct you to the WASP.
26.1, employment references and verification, aiding and abetting sexual abuse. Again, recommendation from WASB that we add this policy. Districts receiving ESEA funds are required to adopt a policy prohibiting school employees from assisting another school employee in obtaining a new job if they have knowledge or probable cause to believe that the other employee engaged in sexual misconduct regarding a minor or student in violation of the law. So that's what this new policy covers. New policy 671.3, employee compensation, unexpected or extraordinary circumstances. This is a very specific policy that WASB wanted us to put in. The policy language is directly from WASB and is needed in case of a public health emergency. Staff getting paid with federal funds such as Title I reading will still be paid. So that's what this policy is for. So those are all our policies that we are bringing to the board for a second reading, for approval of second reading.
And none of these we didn't make any
We
changes.
didn't have any changes for the first reading.
So move.
Second, Kylie.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We have several policies that we were going to recommend to the board for first reading. The first one, 752 district use vehicle and 752.1 exhibit student transportation agreement, alternative transportation. We had a discussion on requirements pertaining to drivers' vehicles and insurance when alternative transportation is used for such things as practice, events, or games. So we updated the policy and this new exhibit to cover those issues. Item 370. Policy 370, co-curricular activity programs. We included a verbiage that including homeschool students, that they could be part of co-curricular activity programs. 836, exhibit animals in the school request form, added 2 lines to communicate to other staff in the building where animals are in classrooms, not just to the principal in the classroom, but just so all staff in case they have allergies. And then just the other line, to ensure no persons in the classroom are allergic to the animal, they may need to consult with a school nurse. We had policy 838, 840, and 842, naming school district facilities, gifts to the district, and grants to the district from private or public sources. Because of our fundraising efforts for the new stadium, we wanted to make sure our policies were in line with how we were fundraising, naming rights, things like that. So the only change that we had was on policy 840. We made the language on policy 840 similar to policy 842, where it said any gifts or donations cannot place restrictions on the district. We updated that to say cannot place undesirable or negative restrictions, because they certainly can place restrictions. If you want to donate to the library, you can, but that's not a negative restriction. So we just added some language. Otherwise, all three of those policies are similar. Sarah, is that okay with you?
You just know from my face that I have questions
Yeah.
of it. Well, an 838, I had a question about how that's still gonna be able to go forward with that first paragraph. Any person nominated must be deceased.
We didn't feel like that needed to be changed. I mean, just because someone is donating money now doesn't mean that our policy on who they name it after needs to change.
Oh, so they don't have to name it after a 3-year deceased person, or they do? That's, you know what I'm saying? A nomination for naming shall be, any person nominated must be deceased for 3 years prior to the board's selection of the name for the facility.
So it's if it's using a personal name.
Oh, so this doesn't apply to corporate names or business names?
No, this is like a personal name, like an individual, if you would name it after an individual.
Well, that's not clear to me in the
Okay.
policy,
Okay.
so like, we want something to look at, because I just assumed when we talk about naming, that corporation names would be included in that, so I think it just needs to be clearer.
Okay.
And 840, the only thing I would say about that place restrictions on the district, the gift, there's a difference between restricted gifts and restrictions on the district. So, I don't know,
Clear that up a little.
yeah, maybe. I can talk to you about that more before second reading, I come to the next
Okay.
meeting.
Yeah, we can certainly talk about that at the next meeting.
Thanks.
Policy 352, field trips. Our nurses looked at this policy and they wanted to add a statement about diabetic students should be accompanied by medically trained adult, parent, guardian, or district staff. So we added that to the policy based on their recommendation. Policy 452.4, administering medication to students. We added a line in there about if there should be a reason for the person not to receive a particular treatment, that should be written down also. Do I have that correct? Yes. Okay. And then the nurses also added a paragraph about diabetic students and some guidelines for them on field trips. If you want to expand on any of that, that's fine. Otherwise, we can move on.
Does anybody need me to expand? If you do, just let me know.
Okay. The next one we have is 523, exhibit periods of exclusion from school with infectious conditions. Just updated the paragraph that related to the coronavirus. In the policy, it has wear facial masks, so it was updated to face coverings are recommended. We have 172 special board meetings. We made a couple updates to this, just to clarify how the date and the time and just are established, who establishes it. And I just don't think our policy initially was really clear, so we feel like the additions we made kind of cleared things up. Any questions? And then the last policy is 187, public participation at board meetings. We added some language in there that when people sign up, we'd like them to sign up their name and address. Let us know if you're part of the district. We just didn't have specifics in there before. We really like hearing the public comments, but I know in recent meetings in other districts, there have been groups that have come in from out of district and really caused some chaos at the public comments. I don't think their comments would weigh as heavily on us. We're more interested in the people in our district, people who have kids in our district. That's who we want to hear, and those carry a lot more weight. So if they could let us know before they speak if they're from out of our district, that I think that will help us as a board. So those were kind of some of the changes we made for those. Unless there's any questions, those are the policies we were recommending for a first reading to the board.
Make a motion.
Thank you, Sarah.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in,
Elizabeth.
I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, I'll try to speak up more.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. We got through quite a few. Okay, item number 6, consideration and action on modifying instructional model for the 2021-22 school year. We actually had a really good discussion last month at the board meeting. It took us 3 attempts to get something to pass, and that's what's great about our board is we have a lot of different opinions, and we're able to have a good discussion. And I think we came to a conclusion about a plan that worked for us. Recommended from the administration, the nurses were on board. Since then, we've heard maybe we want to revisit the thresholds. Again, we haven't changed our policies. Our masks are recommended. We're not changing that. But it sounded like some of the thresholds wanted to be revisited. And that's what we talked about at the policy meeting. Kylie came in and gave her recommendations. We discussed them. And our recommendation to the board was to have a number of if there were 4 COVID cases at the high school, it would be mandatory masking. 4 at the middle school, mandatory masking, and then 1 per classroom at the lower levels. Then the classroom or grade level would be masked. And it was also part of the motion to say that if someone would test, they would be considered positive, and that would count toward the number. So that doesn't mean that that's what needs to pass at the board level, but I'm just sharing with you that's where the discussion led on Tuesday. And I believe since then, our administration and our nurses have done some more work. And so at this point, I'd like to share with you what they have come up with. And I just want all of us to keep an open mind. Just because we feel passionate about something doesn't mean we're right. Just because we feel passionate about something doesn't mean we're wrong. We're here to represent the district and keep an open mind. And like a very wise board member said, we're here to compromise. We're not all going to get what we want. We need to compromise and work together. So with that being said, the administration, and stop me if I'm wrong or if I'm misquoting, at the high school level, they prefer to have a whole number, not a percentage. So the number would be 5 at the high school based on the population. At the middle school, it would be 4 kids. If the level reaches 4 positive cases, then there would be masking required. 3 at the elementary, and then 2 at the ELC.
ELC?
2.
So it's a 5-4-3-2, which would.
So, and I'm gonna go, there's 3 points that I wanna bring forward, and I'm just gonna state them, and then we can go back and discuss. The other thing is kind of like to amend the model. If there's a family member that has positive case, then, and someone has household contact, that family, those students should be quarantined at home. Because it's, if a person has COVID, it's likely the whole family does. So if a student has tested positive, most likely his sibling will be tested positive. So I think probably somebody else can say it a little bit better than I can right now.
Brittany's going to help me out with this too, but we have data that we're building based on kids being in buildings and things that are happening in our community. And I just want you guys to know that, like, we already have household contacts or household experience where we were lucky enough that they didn't send the child, but we're seeing like parents positive, kids positive, multiple kids in that house positive. And so this came from our nursing team where they were hoping to add in that household quarantining for the close contacting. Brittany, did I do okay?
Yeah.
Anything you want to add?
Currently, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 household close contacts. And with our current policy, it states that they can come to school. And it makes me uneasy because they're presumed they could be positive. So if that child, came to school, then we were presumed we could, spread that. So we would like, as a nursing team, for the close contacts to then, of their family member, quarantine. We got lucky this morning. One of the kiddos was gonna come to school, which is okay for our policy, but he became symptomatic. Mom had tested and he was positive. So he was gonna come to school today. So right there, I was like, we have to maybe revisit this because makes me uneasy. And other nurses too.
So would you call that household contacts quarantining?
Yeah.
Is that the
Yeah.
right? Okay. And then the third point I'd like to talk about is if a classroom member has a positive, then the whole class will mask for 10 days. So I think we've kind of talked about that, but.
You're talking about the elementary school?
Correct.
Yeah, and then
Elementary
in grades 5 or 6, then the whole, because they intermingle and they walk amongst each other, it would be the whole grade. Is that correct?
We did talk about that, and it's based on also the grades pre-K through 6, because those are the ages where nobody has been able yet to get that chance for a vaccination. So that's where we were considering that to be the necessity of the 10 days of masking if there was that close contact investigation done. And at 5th and 6th grade, they intermingle enough that it would be by grade, but at the elementary, it would be by classroom. Unless Carla's gonna correct me and say, great,
Lunches together.
lunches together.
Was gonna be my question about how they
Yeah.
handle lunch periods.
Even though they can sit with their classroom at lunch, they are all in,
All in the same
yeah,
room,
they're in the same room.
in the same area.
And it may help us if we are going to mask to not say this classroom this way, this classroom that way, the pinks, the blues, it's gonna be hard to keep track of. So I think by grade there too would be something that I think Carla would be okay with. It's gonna help our nursing team and it would help us. And again, this is the 10 days, right? It's a reaction to what we've seen in our data. It would be temporary. That's why it's not a change of the policy. It's just a change of our practice as we interpret the process that comes out of that.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah.
What that point is?
The third one?
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Ken.
No, that's.
Pre-K through 6, if there's a positive in that grade, there would be an implementation of a 10-day masking for the grades in which the positive case came from
So if a 5th grader was tested positive, the 5th grade's a mask
for 10 days.
for 10 days.
Is that how's that different from the 4, 3, and 2?
Yeah.
So
Does
the
it affect
thresholds
the
are
whole
whole
school?
building.
Okay,
This is per cohort.
okay.
So the 5th grade has a test positive, 5th grade masks, but 6th grade doesn't.
Correct.
But if there are 4 positive cases in the middle school.
Then the whole building would.
Then the whole building.
How are lunches handled in the middle school?
By grade.
Completely by grade?
Yes, ma'am. Is that correct, Mr. Radke?
That's correct.
Thank you for helping me out. And Dan's back there doing that. Thanks, Dan.
How about classroom, checking out bells and changing classrooms and walking down the hallways? Any intermingling there?
I think there is intermingling, John, but I think it's 3 minutes. It's not stopped. It's not close contact. It's, that would be a much shorter time. And as the nursing team has done their investigations, it's just such a short time that it doesn't add up to be, of course, there's difference, but it's not like 15 for 3 feet or closer, right? Those 15 minutes. So it's following the recommendations, I think.
So we're not getting those people that want to mask all the time, and we're not getting the 5%. We're meeting in the middle. And this recommendation is coming from our administrators who are in the school day in, day out. They survived last year. They know what's gonna work. Our nurses are on board with this, is that correct? And we always say to them, thank you for what we do. We appreciate you. This is our time to show what we appreciate them. And we are trusting their judgment. So that's what I have to say. And I'd like to know if you have any questions. We have administration here, we have our nurse here. I'd like to know if we can get on board with these recommendations or if you have any questions.
So what is, I think I missed this, but what is the threshold of confirmed and untested? What is the parameters for that?
I'd like to go with confirmed cases. If we get a confirmed case, that's the number. That's the premise that we worked on last month, and I think we should stick with it. That's a number that we can, we can say they tested positive, that's our number.
But I do have a different opinion on that. If we're telling families that if their child has a symptom, that they should then stay home for 10 days. So if they're not willing to test and prove to the district that their child just had some sniffles, is negative for COVID, they should be allowed to come back.
I believe they're home for 10 days then.
So if they don't test, they isolate for 10 days.
Exactly. So how is that then? If we, I mean, our intent here is to make sure that our children are in school. We all are in agreement that having them at home for the families and for the teachers and for the child is the less desirable option. If the family chooses not to get tested and prove to the district that they're not positive, we then should consider that a positive case. They're not providing us any contradictory data, and that should be then, I feel, should be counted, because I think what the intent here is, especially with the fact that our nursing staff is now getting rapid tests, so access to a test is going to be, that barrier is going to be reduced. And we want, if you don't have COVID, prove it to us, and then let's just move on and keep those numbers down, and we can stay unmasked, and we can go on with education the way we all want it to. If a family is choosing not to work with the district, why do we ignore that and just say, okay, then I have a feeling we're gonna have a lot of people who will just choose not to, in fear that they'll have to wear a mask instead of actually allowing their child to return to school.
So I'm gonna respectfully disagree with you, and here's why. And I've got administration here, so if I'm saying something wrong, please correct me. I think every day there's about 20 to 25 kids at the high school that are out. And by your logic, if 25 kids don't get tested, they're automatically considered COVID, and then we'd be masked all the time. And I just don't think that that's reasonable. I think that parents want their kids in school. I think most parents will get them tested. You're always gonna have those parents that aren't gonna work with the school, but I don't think that means that they should negatively affect our numbers. And I think that it should be a confirmed positive to be for our count. So I entertain some.
Yeah, Kathy, you hear what Fred's saying, though, that
I do.
that just by simply saying we're just not gonna get a test means you can't, there's, even if
But then they're
we're
gonna
positive,
be
you
home
would-
for 10 days.
Yeah, no, I know, but it doesn't, there's no, there could be another case. And
Or there could
probably
be
is.
family members who come to school because they didn't test positive. Their family members will still come to school. They're talking about family contact quarantining. Those family members will still come to school too.
I know, and I'm hesitant to go into the land of could, if, would, what could happen.
Dr. Furukawa's got his hand
And I
up.
know that our nurses also understand, and they keep track of like people who have the sniffles, and there are a lot they're very aware of, I think, what's going on in our school. And I just like to give the trust over to them that they can handle and they understand what's going on and they see what's going on. So I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Dr. Furukawa, with the bad
That's
angle
okay.
here.
That's all right. I think this question can be answered by just pitching a scenario to the plan here, whoever came up with a plan. What will you do when somebody calls in and says, I have symptoms, I'm gonna stay home?
So then, we did this last year too. Last year, if they chose that, or they couldn't get tested, or they didn't want to, then they were out for 10 days, we never presumed them positive. I know this year's completely different, because some of us don't wear masks, and so it's a different ballgame, right? I have a spreadsheet every day that I keep close track. I do have about 20, 25 kids a day at the high school. I have about 15 to 20 a day at the middle school, but I closely monitor all those. So if they call, we recommend testing. And if family members, but with our current policy, choose not to test, then they're out for 10 days. And with our current policy, I do not have to quarantine their siblings. So last year, what we did was we would say, here's our testing sites. If you want to get tested, they can come back as soon as tomorrow. Otherwise, they would need to be out for 10 days. In most cases, it didn't happen often. I would say, I can't give you a percentage, top of my head, maybe 5 to 10%. It was due to the fact they didn't have transportation. Like of those cases, and the remainder, they tested. So it's not high. And I think with having the option for me to test, it helps families a lot. And I'd even go out to a family member's car in full PPE, I don't care, and test them. Just to say, hey, yes, you can come back. They're like my kids too, these kids are, right? So I do anything to help the family. So I think if we do this, we won't see this as much this year. But it is difficult because sometimes families' choice, and if they don't want to, that's okay. But then, again, you're contact tracing, these students, and we don't know if they're positive. So that's difficult. But again, we didn't do that last year. So, what's your opinion? It's a tough opinion. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of times when parents call a kid in sick, they just say, hey, the kid's sick today, right? And then we do the follow-up on our end, but they may share with a school secretary, a symptom. And for us to then take that symptom and classify it as a secretary or whoever as a COVID or a non-COVID, it's very difficult. What we're trying to do is get them to test with us, to get the test, so that we can make sure we know if it's a positive or a negative, to really make sure that it's not gray, in that sense. So, and we want to keep the schools open and reward, the good health too.
So just so that the rest of the board understands, there's nothing that would initiate the school shutting down. I mean, I talked with Sauk County's Board of Health, and if they determined that there were a high caseload that is associated with the school, they may contact administration. But there's no administrative rule at the state that would force the district to shut down. We may have some challenges with staffing, we may have a group of children that are out, but that would be purely an administrative decision based on if we have 50% of our staff gone, can we even function?
Correct. Yeah.
Or, right, I mean, that
Yeah.
would be it, but there's nothing, and I want the public to be clear on that, there's nothing that suggests that at some point this number is going to be reached that we're shutting the schools down for a period of time.
So I'm gonna keep on with this scenario. So we don't know the status, but in this period of time of substantial COVID in our community, what do you tell the kid who is sitting next to them, potentially unmasked?
The student that we would presume positive, they didn't test.
Like on Monday, student A was in classroom next to student B. And maybe they were unmasked, maybe not. But let's just say unmasked, the highest risk interaction sitting right next to them. And then student A disappears on Tuesday with symptoms. What happens to student B?
Well, student A, we would recommend testing. And if they did, then we would then follow protocol. We would notify families, give them, then they have the choice to take them out for the recommended 10 days. If they chose not to test, in occurrence to what we did last year, it would just be, they would be out and nothing further takes place. It just stops there.
So student B may, let's just hypothetically say that student A had COVID, didn't get tested. What happens to student B who is exposed to that positive? We won't know because they refuse testing, we won't know.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty high risk chance that even though we pulled A out, which is great for the parent's choice to not send them to school, what happens to student B who got exposed?
And last year, student A and B were both masked.
Exactly. So that scenario was much lower risk. Now we don't know, well, we could know the masking status, but it's ambiguous. You know, you don't know what kind of combination there is. If it was unmasked and unmasked, that's a really high transmission risk scenario that is now possible when half the students are masked and half are not. So it opens the door to this very high risk scenario of student A, student B, being unmasked, sitting for hours, talking in an enclosed space. That is the highest risk scenario you can create.
Well,
So.
very few students sit for hours and just talk.
Well,
you know,
even an hour.
Right.
So what do we do? How do we resolve that scenario?
So just because it's mask recommended, doesn't mean that there's no masks at all. There
Well, I
are
know.
still students that mask, and I do believe that we make 100 decisions for our students every day as a parent, and it's a parent's decision if they want their child to mask, they should be able to do that. And if they're concerned about that scenario, which is a real scenario, they should have their child mask up, absolutely. And I think that's how I think we should continue on our path that we talked about last month. This needs to be a parent's decision. And there's a lot of students that don't like the mask. There's a lot of parents that want the mask. We just need to leave that in the parent's hand. And I'm not disagreeing with that's a situation, Dr. Furukawa. It absolutely is. But I don't think that the what if situations should be the absolute driving factor.
So I'm
We
sorry.
do need to consider it.
So does that mean the administration and board is okay accepting that scenario at this point? I mean, the parents, yes, they can, that's their choice to send them, but that transmission happens in school. Is that, we're saying that's okay? Is that okay?
Does anybody want to respond or have any other questions or comments?
Would we do contact tracing on that? Say notify them that, hey, student A went home sick?
No. Only if they test positive, then they would. If they
And if
refuse
they're
to
not
test, we're not
testing,
doing it.
then we don't know.
Well, I feel we should still contact families and say, even though that kid went home, if they test or not, they should still say, we need to notify the other families saying, hey, they were in close contact. At least give them a close contact recommendation.
So that was discussed
It
at
was.
policy committee. And one of the concerns is that we just don't have the staffing. I mean,
to do
do all that kind of contact tracing in Sauk County or any of the counties have kind of washed their hands of it. They're not
Yes.
helping us in any way. Last year, we did have for a few months, some assistance from the county in doing contact tracing, and then they tapped out. And there's a lot of other things that our nursing staff have to deal with, that this is consuming all of their time, and we cannot, sorry.
Sarah?
I just want to speak to that point, actually, because that came up on Tuesday, and I feel very strongly that if our nursing staff in conditions like this, assuming we can hire more nursing staff and that there's more nursing staff available in the world to be hired, we should be expanding our nursing staff. Like, as we did last year, we had somebody to bring in to do contact tracing. I mean, I know that we're not in budget committee session. I know that hasn't come before the budget committee, but, just like last year, we tried to support, do what we could to support teachers. It seems like a small investment for a really, really important reason.
Another concern is who's gonna keep track of whether or not kids have masks on.
Well,
that's
Yeah, so that, in lieu of all of those kind of other variables and things that we can't do, that's why I feel very strongly that if we have somebody who is out and not willing to test and confirm to us as a district that they are negative or if they're positive, we should then assume that it is a positive case. And we've talked about this also, is that for this to work and for us to be kind of successful in moving through this year, we're going to need the assistance of our families. And you're right, Kathy. There are families who are going to make right decisions for for themselves and potentially for others. But what do we do about that small percentage who don't take that into consideration? That could have big ramifications. And so I think that we need to include the untested that are out as part of that count, and have our families work with us to prove that we can move forward.
Did you address that? Do you think that should be counted as a student who's out should be considered a positive? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'd like to get your answer.
Well, Jordan, myself, and staff all discussed this today. And again, with the admin team, but we kind of talked about it as well together. Again, it's a different year, right? Because we don't know who's masked and who's not. I get, where Fred's coming from, and I get where Dr. Farrakhan is coming from. It is unnerving, right? Like, hey, we could have this potential case. Personally, with my data, I don't know that families will refuse to test if we have it. There might be a few. So I get that it's, so on each side, it's difficult because, yeah, we could say, okay, we're gonna presume them as positive. Well, then, James and I, Darby and I have to go around to all these classrooms, contact trace. I then presume to send out letters, right, as they're presumed positive. So it is a large undertaking, an extra undertaking, because we're presuming that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
but
I think there's a little misunderstanding. I'm saying that if a parent calls in and says their child has symptoms,
right,
and they're not coming to school,
right,
we should count that as a positive case until that family provides some information to prove that wrong.
right. And if they don't, then that's what I was.
And then if they don't, then they stay home for 10 days.
Right, but then we still presume them as positive, correct?
So
That was the recommendation from the policy committee meeting the other night. We had this long discussion, and at the end, the recommendation to the full board was these, even though we're changing the numbers that we're coming with, we did as a board, as a policy committee, recommend to the full board to count non-tested students staying home as part of the positive, unless they.
But we just heard that there's 20 kids every day that stay home from the high school, and I'm presuming they're not all getting tested. So basically, we're just masking. We're assuming 20 cases every single day.
No,
and then
no, it depends on what their symptoms are.
They could get tested and have a negative test and
I just, I think we're just,
But, so a parent calls in,
Go ahead.
Well, what's the point of having the testing in the schools if we're not going to actually just use the resources? So we have the tests, we've all decided, or at least it seems like, most people are gonna get tested. So it's a very small number of people that aren't gonna get tested. So what's the big deal? That's what I don't understand.
Can I add a
so
scenario?
you think they should be counted as?
Yeah, yeah, if it's that small, if it's supposedly, if we've leveled the playing field so that people can get tested. And so the people who didn't have access because of whatever reason last year can drive up and the school nurse will come out, then what's the big deal?
I want to give a scenario too. So say that it's the high school and we know that we're sitting at four positive cases. And every kid in that high school knows that if they're the fifth case, everybody, they're the reason that everybody's gonna get masked. It's like a disincentive, it acts as a disincentive to test. Because then you can just stay, you're like, oh, I'm sick, I'm gonna stay home, but I may not. When on the other side of the coin, it can be an incentive. It can be an incentive to test because they'd be like, well, I can rule myself out. Does that make any sense?
And I disagree with you, Fred, counting those, because I do know of students that have kind of like morning sickness and they have like stomach aches or nausea. It's not due to COVID, and if they're staying home, you're counting them positive?
no.
Not if they don't have
They have
When
those
do
symptoms.
you make that positive decision? Is it
So
the next day?
They call in, if
In
they
the
have
morning.
those symptoms.
Yep.
The school nurse is going to say, you need to stay home. You need to stay home for 10 days.
But the nurse isn't answering the phone calls, it's the secretaries that are.
I understand that, but
If they have a
the
condition, they know the
recommendation is that
condition,
they stay
they've had
home
it for a
10
number of
days.
years.
So if they have this nausea and then say, I feel fine, I know I don't have it, can I get in and have the nurse test me so I can come back to school?
Okay.
They get tested, they're negative, they come back. I agree, there's going to be situations where somebody feels not well because of who knows what.
Yep.
But then prove to us that it's not COVID so that we can move on. And that's really what I'm looking for, is that we have families work with us and prove that our numbers are actually low and that we have confidence.
Here's the situation. Why don't we get on board with these recommendations? And I trust the nurse that it's not as big a scenario as I think we're making it.
Yeah.
I think we're making a bigger issue out of it. Not that it's not a big issue, but I trust the nurse and what she's saying, and then I think we should do confirm positive. If it gets to be out of control, we need to give administration some room to fix the situation. But I think at this point, it's easier to just count confirmed cases. We've got numbers 5, 4, 3, 2.
Let's
We are
compromise.
compromising.
Let's compromise. Let's find a percentage of our students who are out that choose not to test. And if it goes over that threshold, we're gonna count them as positives then. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if you have 10 kids that are home sick, and over half of them say, I'm not gonna test, then maybe then we're gonna say, well, then we're gonna have to count you as positive if over 50% of them aren't gonna test.
But if you only have 2 kids out and one person says they're gonna test and one person says not, then we mask the
But,
whole
but that's
school?
only one kid.
But if you're gonna make a percentage, you have to stand by the percentage.
That first
Okay.
recommendation is that if a family member tests positive, then that child is quarantined. So we're saying that if a family member has COVID, we're assuming they're positive, but we're not gonna count that, but we're assuming they're positive. I mean, that's what it's saying, that's why they're saying.
That's not what it's saying.
That was just what was discussed, is that when you're in close contact, as Kathy was presenting this, is that it was determined that because of that close contact, the likelihood of them testing or being positive is very high, so therefore we're going to set them.
So there's a difference in that statement versus being presumed positive.
Please clarify.
You're presuming that two students
Being
positive
near
set them
someone
off.
and likely contracting COVID is different than presuming that you haven't.
Okay, so then shouldn't that family then have the ability to test?
Sure.
And prove that that child is not positive and come back to school instead of just saying, well, you're on hold for 10 days. Tough. I think that is less appropriate. I think that there needs to be this incentive to try to get a test so that they can be at school. I want all of our children to be at school, and I'm hoping that we can have a situation where our numbers are so low that we don't have to wear masks. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that there is a pandemic going on and that it can get out of control very quickly. And that we have that we work with our families to make this work.
I think everybody wants their kids to be in school. So I don't think anybody disagrees with that, but I think because a family member tests positive and you may have no symptoms, I don't assume that you're positive. You just have a higher likelihood of maybe contracting it, maybe you're asymptomatic, but it doesn't mean that I'm presuming that you're positive. And yes, you can test and then come back to school.
And how many
So-
times
But
are
that's
people
not what-
contagious
That's right.
before they show symptoms?
That's
Yeah.
not where we're going with this.
I guess I have a concern with that first bullet point. Is that I think that the first bullet point was if a family member tests positive, then the child is quarantined.
Without the ability to test negative and come back to school.
If a child gets positive for COVID, test positive?
No, we're saying no family member tests
Sibling, yeah.
positive.
Oh,
We are quarantining that child for 10 days.
the other child. So if sibling A is positive, sibling B is out for 10 days. It really should be sibling B has to either be out for 10 days if they don't want to test, or they test after, after day.
That's only if you're vaccinated though. So,
Is
the
that,
DPI and the CDC and actually, the county recommends 14 days after, starting the 10th
oh,
day.
right, gotcha.
So
Okay.
technically, if we're gonna follow that guideline, it would be the student is out until he or she tests positive because they live in the said household. Or they quarantine an additional 14 days afterwards. That's what the county, the DPI, and the CDC say.
Gotcha, okay.
Oh, I don't have any, I was just shaking my head at that, yeah. But this is less extreme than that, is what
Yeah.
ultimately.
So that's less
Yes.
extreme, so that's just saying they have to stay, quarantine, because they live in the household where there's a higher probability that, you'll test positive. Unless they were like quarantining in their room.
And if they test negative, they can come back to school?
No.
No.
Okay.
Only
I
if they're a
just wanted
vaccinated
to
student
clear that up.
and they're asymptomatic, they have to test is it 3 to 5 times a year, Paula?
For which one?
Vaccinated students who've been exposed, they can return to school with a negative test after day.
Well.
Not
the
for our
early-
policy, but
earliest-
for the-
The earliest is to test on day 5, 6, or 7, but come back on day 7.
So that's not our policy, that's just a guideline.
But could it be if for vaccinated students
So that would be for grades 7 through 12, we could definitely add that.
who are students who are vaccinated?
Correct, so for
They'd have to
students that
share
are,
they'd have to share their vaccination status and get a negative test on day 5, 6, or 7.
Hold on.
No?
This might need clarification for household members for quarantine, because technically, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to quarantine, but mask and mask for 14 days if you're a close contact. But household, I have to clarify this because it got a little wonky, but the household vaccinated member, I'm not sure. I'm assuming is if you're vaccinated, let's say your dad's positive and you're a school age kid and you're a school age kid who's vaccinated, I believe you still fall into you don't have to quarantine. And you could come back as long as you're asymptomatic and masked.
You're correct. I have a
If you're vaccinated, if you're vaccinated, you can quarantine, we quarantine with a mask.
Dr. Furcal, can I ask you a question? Going back to your
Absolutely.
student A and student B example. So if student B, I guess two scenarios, if student B is vaccinated, what is your opinion or recommendation on that student sitting next to student A who tests positive?
So they are considered a close contact, but they're vaccinated, they technically don't have to quarantine.
Okay.
And monitors, actually you should throw on a mask and monitor for symptoms.
Okay. And then how about if student B is unvaccinated but is wearing a mask? What would this,
Unvaccinated but wearing a mask.
sitting next to
Yeah.
a positive case?
If it's a cloth law, it doesn't, unless they're wearing an N95, which is incredibly unlikely, because they do actually count mask types. But let's say in a realistic school setting, it's a cloth mask, that doesn't matter for a quarantine status.
So you're quarantined even with a mask on?
Yep. That happened all the time last year. Entire schools were sent home, even though everybody was masked. So unfortunately, so here's where there's some acceptable rule breaking happening across the country where infectious disease docs are okay. And I might be even fudging this a little bit, but if that unvaccinated individual was masked and the source was masked, A became positive, but they were masked at the time of exposure, and student B was masked, student B can remain in school. So that's kind of the accepted one.
Because the chances of transmission are low.
So
at that
low.
point, Yeah.
So this is where the gray becomes, this might be River Valley unique. Where student A was positive unmasked and student B was masked, you could keep them, you could draw the line there. Or, this is a little scary for me to even vocalize, but student A is unmasked and positive, he leaves, he or she. Student B is unmasked. You keep them in with a mask on. So there's all these different ways to slice it to keep kids in school. I can feel my mentors just cringing that I just said that as an option, but I'm just telling you, like, here's what's accepted, that's rule breaking, mask, okay? And then there's that, if you want to take into account masking status of the source or the exposed, administratively difficult, admittedly, but throwing on a mask on student B is something pretty effective, I think. It'll prevent B from becoming positive, shedding without knowing. So it prevents that next transmission.
Okay. And then just to follow up on, if you stay home because you're not feeling well, call into school to be presumed positive, symptoms of COVID-19, fever, chills, cough, fatigue, tired, body aches, a headache, sore throat, congestion, nauseous. So those are all guilty.
Those are all
positive.
We use those
So
as
the example
last year.
that Jeff gave is a positive.
That was
Wake
all.
up in the morning and not, have a little queasy stomach, at noon feel better, you're positive.
That's what we used last year.
Well, I just wanted to clarify because we talked about Jeff's scenario that wouldn't be positive,
Oh,
but it's
yeah.
presumed positive. So every morning, if 20 kids are not in high school, we're masked every morning. Right? That's where we're going with this conversation, so we're all on the same page. Yeah. Okay. We're kind of like dancing around where we want to get. We might as well just say where we want to get.
So were you imagining, or when we imagine the scenario of kids calling out sick, are we just going to assume kids, are we gonna just ask parents, are they gonna test or not? And then parents that aren't gonna test, then that becomes a presumed? Do you know what I'm saying? Or are we just gonna assume everybody?
No, I'm just clarifying so we know where we're going.
Wait, well, I'm just
I'm
asking
not-
for clarification beyond that. Do you see what
Oh, I
I'm
see
saying?
what you're saying. So
Because
if they were going to get a test, then we don't count that.
Give them
I
24
think
hours.
the majority of the people are, you know, as the staff said, most people are gonna test. I mean, if you're gonna be out of school for 10 days without virtual options, you're gonna want to get your child back in school very quickly.
Right.
You're gonna get left behind very fast.
Yeah.
I mean,
Then there should be very few that we have to presume positive.
I would agree.
That could be the compromise point.
Yeah, I agree.
That could be the point where we say they have, that they have 24 hours, that there's 24 hours to get a test or something like that.
Or come in,
Or-
just come in and have a test.
Or come in, yeah, come in and get a test.
Now
But
you're
they
asking-
have to be,
That, just the reality of that across the district, if you count up all the kids, that means our nurses are doing 70 tests if they all decide to come in. And that might be a 24 to 48 hour if they do the PCR or the rapid test. So we do have both, but that could be yeah, we do, yep. So I'm just saying that's 70 tests for our nursing staff to give now on top of the investigations, on top of, you know, the regular medical work that they're doing. Not that it's not a good idea, I'm just saying it may not go as smoothly as, like, we hope.
I will volunteer to help as I do with the fire department.
Me too. So will he.
I don't want her to co-parent. I don't want any comments from the audience. I will send you out into the gym. I appreciate you being here, but this is a board discussion.
I think, again, I'm just, you know, if we have that high number of families that do the testing as you stated, that's fantastic. I'm just thinking about those that don't and trying to give an incentive to make sure that they do, so that we know, so that we don't have an inadvertent situation where we cause a spreading event.
so Brittany, the other day, when you were giving us the numbers, you mentioned a good number of pending, you know, there were pending. So there's like, the pending can be like a status for a period of time, whether it be 24, 48 hours. And during that time, we don't count as positive, but then we do. And I understand that, you know, that might be you know, that's a critical amount of time.
Is this putting more undue burden on the nursing staff?
I think so.
Well, you
It's
know
a lot of, I mean, we already track it. And I can tell you today, not only, but I have 7 pending. But in every case I've had in the last 6 days, every one of them, those parents have tested their kids. And that's
Great,
that's
It is great.
a lot of kids.
that's fantastic.
So that's great, right? That tells us something. But I do have pending cases, but they're all getting tested.
Are they
So-
all testing with you?
No, because I don't have it available yet.
So I don't think we'd have 75 tests here.
Right. And if we did, we would just need to address that, frankly. I mean, we would need, again, I go back to we need to staff up in the nursing department this year. Just like we did with substitute teachers last year.
Top of my list to expand my research options on it, Sarah. You know, I'll do my best.
I know, I saw you write it down. Thank you.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Kathy, you just want to reread your recommendations so we can get back to ground zero?
Yeah.
Maybe-
please.
Maybe move forward.
Right on the
Yes. So, whole numbers. For the high school, it's 5.
Okay.
Middle school,
Thank
it's
you, Lauren.
4. 3 for elementary and 2 for the ELC. Quarantining household contacts is the second one. And then the third one is if a classroom member has a positive, then the whole class will mask up for 10 days.
That is K through 6, correct?
K through
Yeah.
6.
Yeah, 5 through 6, the whole class would mask up because the class, they aren't individual classrooms. 5 and 6, they moved one, so it would be the whole grade. But for the younger ones, it would be that cohort or that classroom.
But didn't we talk about the need for being the whole grade because of them spending time together
For
at
5 and
mealtime?
6.
No, even in the elementary school.
Yeah, even in the elementary.
All the first
I-
graders
I'm
go to lunch
telling
together,
you.
all the.
Yeah, I'm just saying
Yeah.
what the recommendation is. And positive COVID cases, not presumed. We just heard from the nurse that it would be an undue burden at this point. But if we find that it's a problem, she'll let us know.
That doesn't close the case though for some of us.
And it was the recommendation of the policy committee Tuesday night to bring it to the full board that we count on students who refuse to test as a positive. That was a recommendation from the committee.
It wasn't a unanimous recommendation, but that was the recommendation.
It was 3-1.
Doesn't have to be unanimous, it is what it is, it was voted in it, so. So, okay, so PK, whole grade, 10 days, if positive case confirmed.
For the pre-K to 4, isn't it the cohort or the class?
And I thought as we talked, and Carla got to a point where it was gonna be very difficult at lunch to decide who was or who wasn't, so we conceded that a whole grade masking at that point would be fine.
Okay, so then another point would be household contact quarantine, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then in our discussions, there was some agreement that if vaccinated, can quarantine in school with masks. Was that?
I gotta go back on that when I was back here, I'm sorry. So what was the last thing you said, sir?
Well, there was some discussion and it seemed like there was some consensus that if the child is vaccinated, can quarantine in school with mask, with the close contact.
Are you
If they're
referring to the
close-
household,
Yeah, that-
quarantine?
That's what I want clarification on. I remember us saying, yeah, there was that could be something we could,
With the household quarantine, we want the student home for 10 days.
No, if the student's vaccinated, the CDC and the DPI recommend that the student wear a mask for 14 days and test on day 3 to 5. That's the recommendation of the CDC. and the
okay,
DPI.
so it's tied with the household contact.
Correct.
Okay.
That's tied with the household contact for a vaccinated student.
Okay, all right, is that how everybody understood it? I just want to make sure we're on the same page with this. And so then the final point was, we're debating is whether it's just confirmed cases or we also include untested. Right? That was the last point.
I want to clarify something, because there's two places where confirmed cases shouldn't fall into the same bucket. Like, because we're talking whole building masking scenario, right? That's this and up.
Yep.
These are individual.
Yep.
So if I'm worried about student B, if we don't know what the status of student A was. And by the time you're masking, by the time you got the positive, student B may have been unmasked for 3 days waiting for student A to get confirmed.
Yeah.
So I think this should be like if you don't know what the status of the person who we've evaluated to be, maybe we've recommended testing because we're concerned they have COVID. Student B who is sitting next to them should be masked. So student B doesn't pass it on to student C and D while student A is waiting. So this should be changed if there's suspected COVID case. That's individual, single. That's a big difference from counting versus this scenario. So we gotta start splitting
The hard.
this thing to
Yeah.
the argument of how do we get to full building closure? And then how we're.
Not full building closure, full
I mean,
mask.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Whole building masking, sorry.
Yep.
We gotta talk about these separately. They're getting mixed up. And we gotta
keep this separate.
So
These
actually,
are-
what I'm thinking is if we could vote on this, and then we can talk about how we're gonna handle the positive cases in another motion, because I think that's I think they're different discussions.
They
So
are
I think we
different
need to get on board with these recommendations or not, and then we can talk about how we're calling the positives, because that's another discussion.
You're not, I'm confused now, okay? So are you saying vote on this and then talk about how we're gonna handle unknowns or?
Yeah, because I just
Untested.
think,
Yeah.
I don't want this all to go away because we can't decide on what's considered a positive.
Oh, yeah.
That's just the count that goes to this,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, so you're just talking about the
So
top.
I don't want this to pass. Because this is a little scary to me. That we're gonna wait to mask
Until we get a positive.
until we get a positive.
So I think what we're saying is like, we want people to mask all the time. I feel like that's where we're going with some of this.
No, as soon as that person tests and it comes back negative, yay, it's not COVID, mask off while we're waiting for the testing. That's the safest thing
And
to do
just a
while we're waiting.
reminder, everybody can mask every single day if they want, you know, we're not telling people not to mask, we're giving people the option, but I feel if we're getting too strict here, I feel
So I
like
have
we're
a
taking away
question.
some of the options.
Then, if we're saying people can mask, and if I had a child in the school district, and I told my child, you will wear a mask at school, and I send my kid to school, how do I know they're wearing their mask? So can I call the school and say, my kid needs to be masked, and you guys are gonna make sure they do it?
People have already called them, and I guess, I know it's a hypothetical, but.
It's a hypothetical, but
Like, at elementary school, people have called their teachers and said, we'd really like you to just remind my son or daughter that they should mask because that's our family wish.
or middle school or high school.
And when you get to middle school or high school, they often, the homeroom teacher knows or the teachers know. But again, they give them that reminder, but because it's a family decision at this point, they're giving a reminder and not fighting about it.
So I feel like we had go ahead, John.
Well, I think with what Dr. Furukawa is saying with the pre-K to sixth grade, will be basically mask all the time. I mean, by the time, there's every day you have X amount of people in those buildings home, and if you have to, that grade level has to mask until we get a negative result for that student, they're gonna be coming on and off so fast that it's better to keep them on if that's the policy we wanna have. Right?
That goes back to the smart people at the CDC figure this out.
Wait,
That
so
was our
That's-
recommendation.
whole grade, wait,
That's the
now-
problem with this, yes. It's tough, it's really hard.
So the PK to
So-
6, whole grade will mask for 10 days if a positive, if there's one positive confirmed case per grade. So it's just, yeah. And then that threshold for the whole school.
All right, I will just inject this whole, and if we want to vote on the top part of that now, we can. The thing I'm gonna inject in is I feel a whole lot different about the bottom part of that what Dr. Furukawa was just talking about. If I knew that transmission in our school district was low or medium, like if we know that that transmission in our area is low, then that sniffle doesn't become as threatening or concerning as if we have high transmission and it's like, well, that's probably COVID then. So I feel differently about that bottom part.
Yeah, if we're going to tear that off, I'm supportive of the upper part. I think that is a better measure than what we had before. Going down below, that's where we start splitting hairs a little bit more.
I think if the goal is to find a common ground, I do think that this is a common ground.
This is,
I do.
probably not what everybody is expecting me to say or wants me to say, but I think for now.
I know.
Did you hear me or no?
Yeah, I heard you, but I just.
Disagree.
The whole part or just the top part?
Definitely the top part for sure.
I mean, to me, we're just dancing around going to require masks.
Right.
You're just spinning it and we're spending an hour talking about, if we want to go to masks, make a motion to go to masks. And quit dinking around with all this PK-6 stuff and, I mean, how are we gonna manage that? I mean, so I don't feel like this is compromise or
took
common
out the middle
ground.
part-
This is going to mandating masks very quickly.
If we take out the
So-
middle part, do you feel that way still?
Well, I think it's a lot less of a mandate on the top. There's, might be okay, but, with what Dr. Furikawa said and what we do with the PK-6, you're gonna mask from grade 6 down.
They're the ones that can't be vaccinated.
And depending upon, how you count absent people with COVID-like symptoms, you'll be masking the whole district.
So then, quick question. So looking at the River Valley Early Learning Center numbers, there are 2 confirmed cases for the 9th. Are those confirmed cases that came in? No, so.
Nope.
Okay, We still have to so count then them. we're also not counting, like, these people never came into the school
Correct.
cases? Okay.
That makes sense. Which hardly would ever happen, probably, beginning
Unless
of
it's a
school year,
weekend.
beginning of second semester, or after holidays.
Right, so if we pass this on tomorrow, the ELC is masked.
No,
Why not?
Because they never came into
they
school.
didn't come to school yet. They've been out the whole time.
Well, that's not what that says.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Well,
They're enrolled, but.
but they, because the ELC didn't start school a week ago like everybody else did, correct?
That's correct.
They just started
We started
So all those,
Thursday.
all those kids played with each other right the 2 hours before they got on the bus, and it's okay now that they,
They didn't come to school until,
well, you don't think they saw their other kids, or, I mean,
we have no control over what the kids do outside of the building,
oh,
outside in the public. We only have them for the 8 hours a year, right?
okay.
That doesn't. I think we need to move forward, and I think that, if we can't vote on anything else, it would, that the threshold, the solid numbers, I agree with that, this percentage and plain, it just becomes very,
Mhm.
I mean, in the end, that percentage is a number. Let's just,
But we also have the one on the bottom, which is coming from our nursing staff asking. The house, someone within a household is quarantined. If one positive in a home.
Okay, so these are the recommendations.
And this is including absolute numbers.
Absolute numbers, positive confirmed. Do you want to do something different with?
Well, I mean, you're down to essentially, just over 1%. We went from 5% to 1%.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you have a suggestion?
Well, I don't think going from 5% to 1% is very good common ground and compromise.
Do you really want 20 kids in school with COVID? Because at that point, that's not just kids coming into school with community transmission. That's school spread. Like, that's the issue with the 5%. Like, it's nice if we were still at August numbers.
Yeah.
Or July numbers. It's great, but we're not. Like, that's the reality. I mean, that's the problem, and that's why we're here. We're not at August numbers in the community. And so we do have to follow those numbers. And so at the rate of transmission, since most of the cases are Delta, when you look at the DHS website, it's more transmissible. So we have to bring the numbers down. Like, that's just the black and white science of it.
So we're on board with this?
I hope so.
This is a recommendation, I guess we tweaked it a little, instead of the whole pre-K to 4 used to be just the cohort, now we changed it to the whole grade. I'd like to change it back, but, where are we on this? Can we get on board
So
with this?
you're saying you would rather see it, the number instead of 5 each one? I mean, that,
Well, she's talking about the one in the middle.
Pre-K to, when I first brought it up, I said each classroom would have to mask.
Yes.
Like if you have one, let's just do the classroom.
Yep.
And then somehow it just got switched, but I'd like to bring it to the classroom. And then for grades 5 and 6, if someone is positive, the whole grade, because they intermingle. And then we've got those numbers up there. This came from administration, this came with our nurses.
Just remember
This
those,
is what they is gonna work for them at this point.
The grade instead of the cohort.
I'd like to
That's
see
what-
the, I'd
I
like
know,
to see the
I know
cohort.
what you would like to see,
But
but
we
they
learned-
brought us with the
they
whole
brought us
grade,
the
right?
idea that it needed to be the pre-K through 6
Is it,
as a whole class.
Whole grade.
So in our conversation this afternoon, James and I talked about PK6 being whole grade level.
okay, so this is what it is then, right up here.
I'm gonna try to see what we can do here and make a motion if it's acceptable. Or are we still discussing?
We need to go with confirmed positives, because if it's all wrapped into one,
You said we were gonna talk about that separate
Okay,
originally,
okay, let's
When you
do
said
this
we
separately then.
when that got put up there. So I'm gonna make a motion that we go with what's on that board there. And then we'll discuss the positive and confirmed,
Define it, how we define it.
how we define it. But I would make the motion to go with what we put on the board there. The only question I have for Dr. Furukawa was, it says test day 3 to 5. Was it 3 to 5 or 5 to 7?
No, it's 3 to 5.
Is it 3 to 5? Okay, I just want to make sure, because I know.
Is there a
some-
second?
If you're a household contact, yeah.
Okay.
Does anybody want to second that?
I'll second that.
Is there any further discussion? So I'm gonna ask who's in favor, and I want you to raise your hand if you're in favor. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
So now the question is then confirmed cases or untested.
So I'll make a motion that positive confirmed cases means positive confirmed cases for the test. No presuming someone's positive.
Because if you presume, we're gonna be
We're gonna be
messed up.
masked 100% of the time.
So
And that goes against what we
our
were,
first
going for
motion
in our
is null
policy.
and void then.
we voted on a policy for mask recommended, so that's why I'm making this motion. Is there a second?
What was the motion, sir?
Positive confirmed cases means a positive COVID test.
I will second that.
Is there any further discussion?
That's just simply a motion. That's it. Positive means positive.
Yeah, and it's on YouTube, so it's out there.
Two negatives make a positive. Okay.
My only comment is, I realize we're voting on this as a board, but if in a month from now, instead of waiting on the school board to have another 3-hour conversation about whether or not it's confirmed positive and the school nurses feel like they need to change, can we just let them do that? Or do we have to have another 3-hour meeting discussing, like, if they're seeing cases crop up differently than you're seeing now,
You know what?
and they need to,
They write me a letter to call a special board meeting.
sure.
I think this is something that's gonna be constantly on our radar and our agendas for a long time. If we need to change, we'll change quickly, we'll do what we can. We'll hear from the nurses, say, this just is absolutely not working, I can't wait a month. We're gonna work with them.
We're still in discussion.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that I feel like there is a way to separate everybody who has a symptom from people who are not willing to get tested and so what Fred was talking about. I think that there's a different way to do that. I think that there is a middle ground here.
Yep, and I also hear we're putting more burden on our nurse, and I think she's handling it really well at this point. And I'd like to continue to let her handle it the way she's doing it. So there's a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Positive means positive. Okay. If you're in favor, raise your hand. Opposed, raise your hand. Motion carries.
Now, I have a problem as the clerk with hand raises because I
Okay.
can't always see
We'll slow down.
Well,
Let's take a roll
roll
call.
calls are better because then even the public watching at home can hear what we're doing.
Right. I'll just say, I was the one who, being a Y, it is sometimes hard to be the last person in the roll call.
Well, every time I do a roll
So
call,
why don't
I
we-
try to
Let's
switch
do a roll
it.
call
We
now.
said in favor, raise your hand so Deb can see who those people are.
Deb,
Well, I have to
Deb,
write,
please take a
Yeah,
roll
we'll
call.
tell you, Deb. That raise your-
Fred she's gonna take a roll call.
this one.
just raise your hands if that makes everybody happy.
Deb, please take a roll call.
Who was in favor? Just raise your hands
Of the yes or the?
of Kathy's motion.
The yes.
Of the positive.
Positive.
So I have Kathy or John. Kylie. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so there were 5 yes and 4 no. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Sorry, Paul and I then after the meeting have to make sure we did the same things right. And when that's one of the reasons I moved over here was to try to see better, but now I still can't see down this road. And then if you take them down too fast, I have 9 people I have to mark.
Okay.
All right, I'd like to make one more motion that these changes be put in place on Monday. I think it's too much of a burden to expect the school to put it in place tomorrow. It would be after this meeting, we'd have to send out emails and parents won't get those tonight. So I'm making a motion to put these effective on Monday. Is there a second?
I'll second, Sarah C.
Any further discussion? All in favor, raise your hand and keep them up. Opposed?
Just two. John and Jeff were opposed.
All right, we'll move on to item number 7, consideration and action on curriculum and instruction committee recommendations.
Sarah. Okay, we're not taking a break. Okay. Okay, we had a meeting on August 16th that unfortunately I couldn't be at. And so I'm going, they talked about a couple important things though. One is the curriculum steering committee update and one is the district goals. Lauren, would you mind if I pass off to you to
Of course.
talk about that a little bit?
So in your packets, you guys, were the district goal slides that were there. And I guess really more than anything, like, this is the fun stuff that we get to do. So after a
This is what
2-hour
that
conversation, you know,
should be
like,
safe for.
this is what the district's for, right? To teach
Right.
people and to move ahead and do all those great things. So thank you for being here and listening through this. And I'll go really fast because I know we're getting tired. Really, the whole point is that we're trying to take a look and make data-driven decisions and really take a look at that very carefully. And so I looked at the research on how to set those goals for a district, and then I took that research and applied it to our strategic plan. So in your slides, you're gonna see something like effective instruction. That comes straight off of DPI's website on promoting excellence. And then I went through the strategic plan and said, okay, what pieces of action have you guys identified in the strategic plan prior to me coming that fit that? Prior to Elizabeth, prior to Sarah, prior to several of us, right? But I made a correlation there that was really, I think, good for our administrative team to see, but also good for our district to see that DPI wants us to promote excellence, and that's what the strategic plan intended, I guess is what I'll say. When you get down to it, in there, several pages back, I show the data that I used to make the decision and took an analysis of, and then you're gonna see a slide deck that has this on it. And really, that became really important to us because I was able to see a preponderance of evidence that basically says we have students that are identified as economically disadvantaged in our district that are not as proficient as their peers without that label. And it allowed me to see a trend within our data that I think many of the staff and administrators prior to me would have also said, yep, we know that's there. There are very specific strategies that we can use as a school district to help kids that are economically disadvantaged, and that became a focus of ours then. Within our district policy, there are different policies that basically say that this district needs to have annually an academic goal and a climate goal, one about the social emotional growth of our staff and students. So I set an academic goal, and I've talked to the administrative team about this a lot, so much so that they are pretty sick of it, I am sure. But based on the idea that 100% of the River Valley School District educational staff will utilize research-based teaching strategies that target all students but pay special attention to those students that have a socioeconomic challenge. So it gives us a focus for our PD. It gives us a focus for where we start. It gives us a focus on how we jump into strategies for our classroom. And those are listed on that slide as well. For the climate goal, we also know that kids do better when they feel like somebody's got their back. When they feel engaged and trusted and loved, they feel like they can learn well. So within that, we put by the end of the 21-22 school year, 100% of the River Valley School District students will share the name of a trusted adult from our district staff. And we'll do that through surveys, through observations, through interviews, but we want kids to know that there's great pride in what we do for them, and we want them to feel the love, I guess is one way to look at that, right? So within that, and if you guys remember this, a couple months ago, I said there's gonna be a district goal, and that's part of our system, but those district goals then fall into building goals, so that there's an alignment in each one of our sites. That makes sense. And so Carla, on this, there is a slide that talks about the Early Learning Center and the River Valley Elementary. Will you share what your goal for academics as well as climate are?
Except that I don't have it up in front of me, so I'm never gonna be able to memorize the exact words. All right, so our academic goal by the end of the 21 and 22 school year, 100% of RVE ELC educational staff will increase their use of small group instruction for all students. Remembering students have socioeconomic differences in order to improve proficiency in literacy. So basically what it says is that all teachers are working hard to increase their usage of that small group. We have lots of studies that show that small group is the best way for us to reach all kids at all levels. And so that is one of the things that we're really going to work hard at. Not only that small group also kind of figures into our climate goal, responsive classroom approach, which we did a great workshop on for 4 days at the end of the summer. It'll be used in all of our classrooms to create that connection with a trusted adult by the end of the 21-22 school year. We're measuring that with staff and student survey data, but that small group piece as well factors into making those connections with staff members.
Mr. Radke, we also have goals at middle school.
The academic goal reads, by the end of the 2021-22 school year, 100% of the River Valley Middle School students will increase in literacy proficiency by utilizing the updated MLSS, which is multi-level systems of supports structure, small group instruction, and posting standards-based learning targets in classrooms. This progress will be measured through the use of formative and summative data, classroom data, STAR scores, Wisconsin Board exam data, and the IXL diagnostic tool. Our climate goal reads, by the end of the 2021-22 school year, 100% of students will attain a sense of belonging at River Valley Middle School. This progress will be measured utilizing the Connections Survey, data for activity participation, and the YRBS, which stands for the Youth Risk Behavior Survey.
And at the high school, Darby couldn't be here tonight, but I'll read his, and it's gonna sound, I hope, really similar. By the end of the 21-22 school year, 100% of the River Valley High School educational staff will increase their use of strategies designed to improve academic proficiency of low socioeconomic students. These strategies include small group instruction at the high school, setting and posting learning outcomes visually for the kids, as well as refining our co-teaching model, which would be connections between special education and co-teaching with regular education. The progress is measured through formative and summative data. Climate goal, 100% of the students within River Valley High School attain a sense of belonging, and this progress will be measured utilizing connection surveys, data from activity participation, surveys and observations as well from the freshman AM Blackhawk period. They've put in place a really important time at the high school for the 9th graders to have a specialized Blackhawk to make sure they make the switch from middle to high school smoothly. Okay, and so there's a little different data there. Like course enrollment is data that we look at. Is it balanced? That kind of stuff. So some of that goes. So again, back to, I have to have these goals. We have a district goal for academics and as well as climate. Then in the buildings, they have goals for academics and climate as well, to push our work along, to make sure that we're all on the same page, driving the same bus, if you will, and that we're going down the road together. So that's what we presented. There were some action statements that came out of that then, Sarah.
Right. Yes, so there was a motion to, the two goals that Lauren read out, I don't think I need to read them again, were brought to the full board, to the full board for approval.
Is that item number 8, the next item?
Oh, sorry.
It might be.
Did we go out of order?
Oh, I just want to make sure that that's what we're talking
about.
Correlation of strategic plan. correlation.
Yeah. I guess that's, yes, I guess that is that. And then also there, so do we want to do the other motion too, that we brought?
The other thing that came along with this is that you guys know, I particularly pay attention to the documentation of our curriculum. And one of the things that we've done and taken a look at is we paid for a curriculum audit that was done by CISA 3. And what they found is there's not a lot of curriculum documentation in this district right now. There's a lot of great things happening, but there's not a lot of it written down, so we can't analyze where the holes are or where we're doubling up. And so we've taken a look at that. We reported out to the CNI committee as well and talked about, we have from teacher steering committees an agreed upon process of how to get year 1, which is almost like a syllabus per grade for every subject, finished by the end of this year so that we can start that curriculum documentation process as well. So it gives us a targeted focus as we go down the road with staff.
And that was brought that was a motion or a recommendation to us, the full board.
Can you state that recommendation?
Yeah. All staff build year 1 curriculum documentation following the guidelines from the steering committee that worked together this summer.
I'll second that. That's something that you wanted approved by the board. Yeah. So no, that's a great thing. So you're basically saying that each teacher has a syllabus, so they know what's being taught. So I think that's fantastic. So there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
So are we moving on to number 8 now? Is that where?
Are you done with your
Yeah.
report?
Well, yeah, I mean, there were a couple other things on the agenda. One was that Brian and Sean are still working on the website. If you want to give us any updates on that.
It's just at a point where we have a meeting next week to take a look at the certain formats of what the new website could look like. So we have that coming up next week and we'll agree upon that. And we'll present to you more next month about what the choice is.
For the website for the school?
Yes. Doing the website for the school. Currently, the website doesn't have the capability of even like on your phone, being compatible with a
Yeah,
phone. So like we're looking at a newer version, and we're also, as we do that, making sure that we take the good stuff over and not take over the stuff that's not used anymore.
That's basically, is that, they'll hit the high points?
That's a high point, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So we'll move on to item number 8, consideration and action on 2021-22 annual district goals. So it'd be the correlation to the strategic plan and the correlation to the building level goals, which we just heard. So we just like to have that approved by the board.
I'll make a motion that we adopt that.
I would second Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Any further discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I guess.
Item number 9, consideration and action on resolutions accepting gifts, and I believe we do have some.
Yeah, I guess I will jump onto Kathy's piece of paper because I lost mine. Just really quickly, again, thank you to everybody that offers up stuff for the River Valley School District. We have $1,000 to Fund 21 for school supplies from Mr. Robert Lang. We have $500 to Fund 21 for school supplies from Jen Kramer. We have $100 to Fund 21 for school supplies for students, especially at the beginning of the year this happens, from Robert and Janelle Elmer. We have $100 to Fund 21 for students in need from Derek and Janet G. We also have $3,482.20 to the football team for the football uniforms from our Athletic Boosters Club. And we also have $750 to our swim team for the municipal pool fee, the use of that pool that is paid for by our Athletic Booster Club. Once again, speaking to the great wealth of this district.
Fantastic. Is there a motion to approve?
So move, Sarah C.
Second, yeah.
It's a resolution, so we'll take a roll call, no hands in the air.
John,
Yes.
Sarah C,
Yes.
Kylie.
Yes.
Fred.
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
I'll vote yes, and Sarah,
Yes.
9 yes.
Motion carries. Again, generous, very generous community. Item number 10, consideration and action to adjourn to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.851A and 19.851F for update on 2021 expulsions. We'll take a short break before we move into closed session.
Thank you, Sean.
Do,
We have a
we gotta
motion.
get a motion and a second
No,
and.
no, we're going into closed session.
Oh, yeah, we need to make a motion.
So moved.
Second, Sarah C.
All in favor?
Oh, oh,
Sarah C.
Isn't, what's the resolution?
To go into closed session.
We need a roll call to go into closed session.
don't we?
Paula says yes.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
Good job,
All
Deb.
right.
Paula's giving me the, yes.
Sarah C,
Yes.
Kylie,
Yes.
Fred.
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
I'll vote yes, Sarah,
Yes.
and John,
Yes.
9 yes.
Because now we will go into closed session. We'll take a 5-minute recess.
Okay.
Seriously, like.
Can we?